Good morning. Oh, you can do better than that. Good morning. Thank you. You've driven through sleet and rain and snow to get here. We really, really appreciate it. So, I want to welcome everybody to the third biennial New England Women's Policy Conference. If you were here with us in 2014, right in this spot, or 2016, welcome back. If you're a first-time attendee, welcome. If you're a young women leader in the Ignite track, special welcome to you, young women, upcoming leaders. We need the next generation. So we're very excited to have you all here. I want to say thank you to a few people and then try to set the stage with a bit of context. There's too many people to thank by name, but just a few thank yous. First of all, to our amazing planning committee representing all 6 New England states. We have women's commissions and women's funds from all over New England, so thank you to them. I want to give a special thank you to Denise Schultz, who you'll hear from shortly. As the founding director of the New England Women's Policy Initiative, I could not be more honored or humbled to pass the torch to Denise. She is an amazing leader. Not only is she a member of the leadership team of our center, but she is an elected school committee member. She walks the walk and talks the talk. And not only that, she is an alumna of our graduate certificate program in gender leadership and public policy, where we prepare women to be leaders in the public and nonprofit sectors. So she is the embodiment of our program and an amazing leader of this effort. Thank you, Denise. I want to give a special shout out to our friends and partners at the John F. Kennedy Library and Museum. James Roth, who you'll hear from in a minute, Deputy Director, Stephen Rothstein, who's, Stephen, where's Stephen? Raise your hand. Executive Director of the John F. Kennedy Foundation. And a wonderful surprise this morning, the new Director of the Library, Alan Price, has joined us. And so we're looking forward to continuing our partnership with all 3 of you. You've been wonderful partners since 2014, and I urge everybody to open their program book and just look at the inside cover, where you will see that John F. Kennedy was the first and the only president of the United States to ever establish a commission on women and to really look at the public policies that women needed. And he did this with Eleanor Roosevelt, a heroine to, I'm sure, many of us in this room. But anyway, I think it makes it very fitting for us to be here. And then I would also like to thank 2 leaders at UMass Boston, Catherine Newman, our interim chancellor, and David Cash, dean of the McCormick Graduate School. You cannot build a regional policy program and event without the support of key institutional leaders. I want to thank you, Chancellor Newman, for your scholarship on many of the issues that we're going to be talking about today. Your books, one of whom I've taught, on low-wage workers, I think had just set the stage for a very important national conversation. And Dean Cash, thank you for your years of service in state government. You help us believe that state government really is a vehicle for change, and that's what everybody in this room is all about. So thank you both, Chancellor Newman and Dean Cash, for your support and inspiration. So I just want to take a few minutes to reflect on this historical moment that we find ourselves in as we begin the conference. This is both a very exciting moment in U.S. history and a very challenging moment. And I think we have 2 tasks today. First, we're here to celebrate women candidates and campaign workers and leaders at every level of state government and grassroots organizing. And second, we're here to engage in policy discussions, to weigh complicated policy options, to consider how to draft legislation, build broad policy coalitions, get policies that will benefit women and their families actually enacted into law. So it's an exciting moment we're seeing because we're seeing an unprecedented rise in the number of women who are running for elective office and who won elective office. But we're also seeing an unprecedented rise in people whose names we don't know, who are just out there and involved. I'd like to ask, could you please stand if either you have been a candidate since 2016 or you worked on somebody's campaign? Wow. All right, keep standing, keep standing. Please stand if you are thinking that you might run for office in the future. Don't keep standing. Okay. And third, please stand if you went to a Women's March event or any related event following. All right, I think we've got the whole room standing up here. Fabulous, fabulous. Okay. So women are on the move. Women's leadership is on the rise. We are sending diverse women to Congress. We're very proud from New England, for example, to be sending Ayanna Pressley, the first African-American woman to ever be a part of the Massachusetts congressional delegation, and Johanna Hayes, the first African-American woman in the Connecticut delegation. On the state level, we have over 950 women that ran for statewide office or state legislature. That's not even going down into the local level. Over 950 women, and we'll be honoring them at the end of the program. There have been increases in women's representation in the state legislatures by about 4 or 5%. And that may not sound like a big number, but when you have been stalled, as we have in Massachusetts since 1993, 4% is huge. So this is progress. We are moving in the right direction. It is also a challenging moment, as I said, because we have a level of polarization in our political system that we've never seen before, at least that I would say I have never seen in my lifetime. We have attacks on women, on people of color, on immigrants, on LGBTQ people, people of different religious faiths. We have attacks on our free press. We have immigrant children separated from parents at the border. And we have suppression of the right to vote, such a fundamental part of our democracy. So we must respond with new policy initiatives to protect our civil rights and to pursue economic justice, which is really the theme of this conference. We must roll up our sleeves. Let's make today a very productive policy discussion. Let's get to work. So in closing, thank you for joining us to celebrate the recent advances in women's public leadership, and thank you for engaging in a collective process of creating public policies that will serve women, their families, and all Americans. Thank you very much.
Please welcome James Roth, Deputy Director, John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum.
Good morning. I'm James Roth, Deputy Director of the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum. And on behalf of Alan Price, the new director of the library, I'm so thankful that he's here, and all my library and foundation colleagues, I want to welcome you to this wonderful New England day. I'm actually very surprised and very happily surprised that there are so many people here today. Sometimes when we have this type of weather, the numbers drop off, but you are all very, very intrepid travelers, so thank you for coming. And it is truly our pleasure to host you here at the Kennedy Library and Museum because we attempt to look at what's happening in our country and the world around us through the lens of John F. Kennedy. And the challenges of the Kennedy era come to life through our archives, our museum, our website, and in our many education and public programs. Through these resources, many are inspired to better examine and reflect on the crises and opportunities of our time. One such resource are the records of the President's Commission on the Status of Women, as Ann mentioned earlier. While President Kennedy did establish the commission, it was Esther Peterson, Assistant Secretary of Labor for Women's Affairs, who first suggested the President's Commission. Ms. Peterson and a few of her staff members developed the idea and made a formal recommendation to the President in June of 1961. Chaired by Eleanor Roosevelt, members included educators, writers, leaders of women's organizations, union leaders, 5 cabinet members, and members of both houses of Congress. The commission examined discrimination against women and ways to eliminate it. It studied legislation and services that would help women more easily fulfill their roles, whether as housewives, workers, or citizens, and the commission's work gave impetus to legislative and executive actions. For instance, it recommended the executive order, which included women in the requirement for equal employment opportunity under federal contracts. In 1963, the President signed the Equal Pay Act, which had been endorsed by the Commission. The Commission advocated changes in state laws that excluded women from jury service, from owning property or businesses, or from legal control of their own earnings. Within a few years, every state had established its own commission on the status of women. And the commission also made recommendations to the private sector on issues such as daycare, access to education, and wages. While this is just a very brief overview of the impact of the commission, I hope it helps to inspire, give context, and illuminate your discussions today. So thank you and welcome to the library.
Please welcome Catherine Newman, Interim Chancellor, University of Massachusetts, Boston.
Thank you so much, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Let me start by asking you, how many of you recognize the name Molly Orshansky? Anybody out there know who Molly Orshansky was? Molly Orshansky was an economist and statistician who in the 1960s was the first person to define the poverty line, the federal poverty line. She is a giant in the history of American social policy, and we wouldn't be able to talk about the issues you're going to consider today if it weren't for the work that Molly Orshansky did in the 1960s. So as Anne pointed out, there is a very long history of women's leadership at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level in defining the very issues that bring you here today. And let us remember that issues like poverty matter to everyone. Men, women, families, children, they engulf the entire society we live in. And they define the issues of our day, which are predominantly inequality and disinvestment in public institutions that are the lifeblood of a free nation. And you are here today to help us understand and to foment opportunities to change that landscape. And there has never been a more important time to do so, because despite the extraordinary electoral victories, and I congratulate all of you out there who were responsible for them, there is an enormous agenda to achieve. We have never had a greater level of inequality in the United States than we do right now. Nonetheless, there are some important opportunities on the horizon, and I just want to put this in front of you as I do all audiences when I get a chance these days. We are headed into a period of labor scarcity. There is never a better moment, ever in the history of the country, than periods of labor shortages to address the very issues that bring you here today. It is the point at which you can achieve a greater degree of pay equity. It is the period in which people of color, young men in particular, can move into the labor market and find opportunity because there is a shorter list of people out there for employers to choose from. So let's recognize that despite the complexities of what we face, this is going to be a golden moment, especially for the people that we're training here at UMass Boston, which is a majority-minority institution serving the labor market of the city of Boston, and I couldn't be more excited about what we're going to be able to do for them in this upcoming period. That will be ever more true because we have an extraordinary mayor at the helm who has offered visionary ideas about how to protect our waterfront, who has been absolutely instrumental in making women's issues at the forefront of the city's concerns. He is accompanied, of course, by all of the elected officials who are here today, from district attorneys to incoming congresswomen. It's an extraordinary time to have this crew on deck to attack the issues that I've been talking about and that your conference is organized to. My own scholarship has been focused on these issues for the better part of 30 years. I have been tracking the fate of low-wage workers in an unequal economy, especially in Harlem, but also here in Massachusetts, all throughout that period. And what I can tell you is this: the vast majority of poor people in the United States work for a living. They just earn too little money to pull above the poverty line. And that is truly the question of our moment when it comes to poverty. It's not about welfare, it's not about benefit programs, it's really about wages and what it is we can do to enable people who are in the labor market, first to secure a place, to secure the hours they need to be effective, and then to keep moving up that ladder. There is no shame in entering the labor market at the bottom rung. There's a shame in being stuck there. So we need you to help us figure out how that ladder of opportunity can proceed for every American of all colors. These are the central issues that preoccupy my colleagues, Ann Bookman and all others involved in the New England Women's Policy Initiative and our center, which Dean David Cash has been responsible for helping to flourish. I'm extremely proud to be associated with a university that has made such landmark efforts to place these issues at the front of the agenda, the policy agenda. I'm really delighted to introduce and welcome Mayor Walsh, a longtime friend of UMass Boston. He is the first mayor to establish an Office of Women's Advancement, which recognizes the struggles and the need for support of Boston's working women. His personal attachment to these issues is what we really are here to celebrate this morning. It has led to groundbreaking achievements of a hard legislative nature on pay equity, on salary negotiations. For our students, the mayor's office is an opportunity to engage in internships that lead them to career opportunities, that lead them to those elected officials' positions that all of you represent. So we are looking forward to working with the mayor and to having more opportunities to make sure that this extraordinary campus, UMass Boston, becomes or continues to be the engine of human capital of all kinds, but especially our young women, for the city of Boston and for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Thank you so much for attending.
Chancellor, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing. I want to thank Ann Bookman as well for your great work on the Center for Women in Politics. Congratulations, and I have two graduates that, I have more than two graduates, but Joyce Lenahan, who is my Chief of Policy, went here into the program, and also when I was a state representative, I had Miriam McHugh, who went through the program, and actually a bunch of people in my office, and Marianne now is the Head of Intergovernmental Relations for the Mass Nurses Association, so thank you for that. We also are joined this morning by Tanya Del Rio, who is the Director of our Office of Women's Advancement, who is going to be leading a panel. I don't know if she's in the hall or outside, but I know she's somewhere, right there. There she is. Thank you, Tanya. But I want to thank you all. And I want to thank everyone for being here and welcome to Boston. As already said, we have a beautiful Boston day today. I'm not too happy about the snow. It costs about $1 million for every time it snows in Boston with plowing. But it's here, and we'll get over it, and it'll be gone later on today. We have a heat wave coming this afternoon, 44 degrees. So those of you that are not from Boston area, from the south, if anyone's here, you'll enjoy the heat wave later on today. I want to thank UMass Boston on their leadership, particularly on many issues in our city. UMass Boston is one of two public universities in the city of Boston. The other one's the Mass College of Art. But the issues that UMass Boston tackles are very important to what we're talking about today, and they've done that for decades here in the city. The university shows the promise of higher education, and it's been certainly an engine of opportunity for working class students here in the city of Boston and working class people here in the city of Boston. It's where, as I mentioned, many women have launched their own public careers by coming to this campus. In the city of Boston, we have made gender equity in women's advancement major priorities in the administration. We've dug into this work to lead true culture shifts throughout the city, throughout our own city hall, our own organization, and throughout the region. I've been proud to put my full support behind the work, both as a man and as a mayor, in what we're doing. Women are leading key departments throughout the city, from the chief financial officer, the chief of housing, and so many other departments that we have in city government. It's about a lot more, though, than numbers. It's about amplifying women's voices and making sure that that happens. It's about making sure that we have a sense of diversity and the perspective at the table and at every table when we talk about issues and people that can make important decisions. This is especially important work when we talk about closing the gender wage gap. When I heard of when we were talking about President Kennedy starting the Women's Commission back in the 60s, that was must have been an incredible time when that happened. When I became the mayor, we started talking about closing pay equity, and we had been talking about it since the 60s. And we've been filing legislation since the 60s. And we've been talking about it since the 60s. And we filed more legislation, and we talked about this is going to be how we're going to do that. When I became the mayor, I thought there was a real opportunity here with Joyce Lenahan and other folks around me that we can make a real difference. It's about time that we stop talking. So when I got elected 5 years ago, I worked alongside the Women's Workforce Council and Walsh University. We published a historic report that shows exactly how big the problem is here in the city of Boston, that women are underrepresented and underpaid in our workforce. We knew that, but we took that report to see exactly where the gaps are, where the problems are. It was the first in the nation using real wage data, self-reporting by businesses in the greater Boston area. We worked with businesses, and we got about 200 businesses to give us the information of their wages in their companies, women compared to men. And we looked at that. It was anonymous information. And we represented about 16% of the greater Boston workforce. About $14 billion of earning was the data that we looked at. It showed a 24% wage gap for women in Boston. And the numbers are even lower when you look at Black and Latino women. So right there, we knew there was a problem. We said, okay, there is. We called on Boston employers to do something about it. So 200 businesses signed on to the 100% Talent Compact. They've committed to wage data and adopting best practices to retain and promote people from within their companies. I ask you, if you work in the Boston area or organizations, ask your employer if they're part of this conversation. We're not going to take names. We're not going to take information. We're going to be looking at the wage data to see exactly where the shortfalls are so we continue to move forward. We're also working directly with employees. We created something that's called the free salary negotiation workshops. And so far, we've empowered over 8,000 women to ask for equal pay for equal work. I was going to an event one time in Boston, and a woman got on the elevator, and she looked at me, and she said, I want to thank you for the salary negotiation workshop. I'm like, oh, you're welcome. And she explained to me that when she got the job, because of going through the training, she was able to get $15,000 more for her job because she was able to negotiate a higher wage. The UMass Boston Center for Women in Politics and Policy studied the data. They find 90% of the women who attend these workshops took some kind of immediate action. They're using their skills and getting raises that they deserve. We've developed a model in how this is working. Other cities across the country are asking us for this information because the word is spreading. So I'm asking you, today you can grab Tanya or a whole bunch of folks that are here from the city and ask them how this began and how we can help other cities across America. This is hard work, but nothing happens overnight. But change is happening. We're chipping away at the culture that systematically undervalues women's work. We're also taking real action to address persistent logistic barriers facing women and their families, like childcare. We know that it's especially tough for women in low-wage jobs and single moms. Our Office of Women Advancement and our Economic Mobility Lab are working together to understand the effects of working women. The city's Director of Women's Advancement, Tanya Del Rio, is here, and she's going to be talking at 2:30. She's going to be moderating a panel called Policy Solutions for Low-Wage Workers, which focuses on fair scheduling challenges for workers and their families. You're going to have an impactful discussion today about this and many topics. My hope is that leaders here in Boston and New England are able to share their best practices that they've experienced and work together to solve real regional challenges. I just want to also say that thank you for your involvement in the political process. And don't be afraid to run. Don't be afraid to put your name on the ballot. I grew up literally a mile from this building. when I was a kid, we'd come to this library, and I would see that President Kennedy was a Boston guy. And I grew up in an Irish Catholic family. My mother and father are immigrants from Ireland. And public service was in my blood. And I remember when the first opportunity presented itself to me to run for state representative. And it's a tough decision. It's a tough decision that first day, and I thought to myself, I knew I wanted to run, but I didn't know if I was going to run. And when I went to City Hall and pulled the papers, that day I knew it was the right thing for me. Win or lose, you elevate the conversation. You are able to push agenda items. You're able to move forward. Only a handful of people win. It's not about winning or losing. It's about elevating the conversations and having those dialogues throughout the entire country. And that's what we need right now. It's not about the elections, and sometimes it is about the results, obviously, last week in Congress. But it's about having the dialogues and the conversations so that we don't start something and then never talk of it again. So again, I want to thank all of you for being here today. I want to thank you for being part of this important conference and these important conversations that you're going to have today. And enjoy Boston.
Please welcome Denise Schultz, Director, New England Women's Policy Initiative.
Good morning. It's so wonderful to see this room full of activists and advocates here today from all over New England. Thank you for braving the weather and showing up. It's going to be a great day, and I'm really excited. Thank you, Mayor Walsh, for your wonderful remarks talking about what the city of Boston is doing. Part of why we bring this convening together is to best practice share what's happening across New England. We have some great examples going on in Boston. We have other examples in New England, and that's why we're here today. So thank you. I wanted to really get up here to recognize our planning committee this morning. We would not be here today without the wonderful intellect of our planning committee members. So I wanted to ask our planning committee if they could stand up so I could recognize them. And I'm going to embarrass them by calling out their names. We have Jill Ashton from the Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women. Amy Gallant from Maine, the Permanent Commission on the Status of Women in Maine. Mary Ann Moore, also from the Permanent Commission on the Status of Women in Maine, who come almost from the Canadian border to join us today. Kelly Nevins from the Women's Fund of Rhode Island. Carrie Brown from the Vermont Commission on Women, also another long drive, so thank you. And we have Mary Lee Kiernan from the Connecticut's Permanent Commission, the Permanent Commission on the Status of Women in Connecticut, Inc. And is Carolyn here? Carolyn's not here. And then I'd also want to acknowledge our new a new national partner for us this year. We're super excited to have partnered with Ignite. So we have Amy Zuccaro, who's their Chief Resource Officer, and Sarah Guillermo, over here. Sarah, I'm embarrassing you. Say hello. Sarah has also been a part of our planning committee. So I just really wanted to center these wonderful women. We would not be here today without their 11 and a half months of contributions to get us to where we're at. So thank you. I did also want to just recognize two members of my staff that have been incredibly helpful, and I wanted to give them some recognition. Jennifer Vivar Wong, who is going to join us later on today. She has been one of my program assistants, and Denise Moreau, who's out there doing speaker check-in, has also been invaluable to me today. Now I'd like to turn it over to our morning plenary. This will be our first kickoff of our Ignite programming, and we're super excited. I'm going to not take any of Sarah's time, but I just wanted to introduce the members of this panel. We have Sarah Guillermo, who's the Chief Program Officer with Ignite, and then our panelists are Sumbul Siddiqui, who's a city councilor in Cambridge. We have, you can come up, yeah. We have Kesha Ram, who is a former state representative from Vermont, and Ellie Curtis, who currently serves on the Army National Guard in Rhode Island. So I will turn it over to you. Thank you for being here today.
All right, good morning, everyone. Oh, that was lame. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Awesome. So we are so excited to be here this morning. I'm going to do a little bit more introduction because I practice name pronunciation, and I want to be very successful with that. So, like Denise said, Sumbul, yes, Siddiqui, is a first-term city council member in Cambridge, and she got a BA in public policy from Brown and a law degree from Northwestern, and she co-founded the Cambridge Youth Council, earning her a Cambridge Peace and Justice Award. Keisha Ram was elected to the Vermont House of Reps at 22 years old. Who's 22 in the House? Clearly not me. Awesome. And she spent her first few years as the youngest legislator in the United States during her time. And then she recently graduated from very close to here from the Harvard Kennedy School. And then last but not least, Allie Curtis was Miss Rhode Island in 2015 and currently is enlisted in the Army National Guard and served as her student body president at Syracuse University and worked in Congresswoman Ross Lettinen's office a couple years ago. And I'm sad she's retired. Oh, I'm so sad. So sad. So we wanted to have a little bit of a conversation about, so our panel is young and running, and we all have young people. I ran for my first election in the first grade and kept running, and now currently serve on a community board in my county in California working on healthcare policy and to ensure that we allocate $5 million to our county in the best way possible to meet the best needs of our community. And so I'm the only person of color. I am also 10 years younger than any of my other committee board members, and so representation matters, clearly. And so I'm super excited and pumped to have this dynamic group of humans with me today. And so first, let's talk a little bit about paths to political leadership and where we all started and why you decided to go on this path.
Sure. Is my mic on?
Yeah, here we go.
Great,
The echoes
great.
in the library has started.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. So my path started really early, and that's because as a high school student, I worked with one of my friends, and we co-founded a youth council. And really, we wanted to get more involved with the city government. And I have a distinct memory of myself in the city hall chambers. We were testifying on trying to lower the voting age to 17 in local elections, and the city councilors were speaking to us, and I remember back in my head thinking, that job, sounds really, this looks really fun. And so I filed it in the back of my head and, went to college, went to law school, came back in 2014 and got more involved in Cambridge and saw that, wow, some of the people who were on council back then are still on council. There's no term limit. So I said, and also there's no young person on the city council. So I thought that was problematic. And there's one woman of color on the city council, and this is Cambridge. And so, the 2016 election happened, and that really propelled me into thinking, okay, I think it's something that I could finally do. And for me, I knew that I love constituent services. I'm a legal aid attorney as well. And I also wanted the broader policy experience. I've been impacted by policies in my personal life, everything from affordable housing early on, from Head Start. So I know the power that public policy has. And the chance to do that in Cambridge was city council. I decided to run. It was 26 candidates in the election for 9 seats, 6 of whom were incumbents. And I ended up getting the second highest number of votes in the election. And I have to say, there is no greater honor than to serve. It's a dream. It's not always easy, but it is. You wake up and you get to help people, and I couldn't be happier. So I'm very lucky to be doing this and to be serving my first term.
So first of all, what a tremendous honor to speak at the Kennedy Library. I'm just taking this all in because if you had asked me to speak about thermodynamics in the basement, I would be here. And sitting in front of all of you is a tremendous honor. As you heard, I graduated from the Kennedy School last year, and I spent a lot of time here. I really came here to look for guidance and to reflect. It was post-2016 election, and this is an incredible place to come to think about tumultuous times in our country. And I don't know if any of you have nerded out like I have and watched the introductory video, that's 20 minutes, like many, many times. But the first quote from John F. Kennedy in that film is not one of his most famous ones. Does anybody know what it is? And Alan Price isn't here anymore, so he can't answer. I actually have the transcript of the video, and I'm still going to paraphrase, but President Kennedy says something like, the opposite of a truth is not a lie, but a myth, because a myth is pervasive, and it pushes us in directions towards things that we can't really achieve, and that we set ourselves up for failure by looking at the myth and measuring ourselves by that standard. And women's heads are filled with so many myths about running for office. You're not qualified enough, you have to have a story about your kids, tripping on the sidewalk to run, that young women really have no place until they've had kids and they've done enough and they've gotten 2 master's degrees. And when you say you're qualified and you say that you're ready to serve in office, that's not a lie. Men wake up every morning and look in the mirror and say, I'd be great. Okay, so for you to get up and say, I understand what it's like to try to pay off my student loans and think about affording a house in the next 10 years and raising children and paying for childcare. I know what it's like, to watch my peers struggle to find a job, to do any number of the things that we're dealing with right now, or think about generationally what's happening with climate change. You have a life horizon that qualifies you to be in government, and you're highly underrepresented there. And so, I'm just thinking about how being nervous on the same scale that I was the first time someone encouraged me to run for office. And Sarah has me beat. I did run in 5th grade for student council. I was the only girl, and I won. And I gave all these speeches at the school board about lunch and things. But I took a hiatus from politics after 5th grade. I was an environmental activist. I thought a lot about how you rail against systems of power. I didn't really feel like I had a voice. And in 2006, I was a sophomore at the University of Vermont. And Bernie Sanders was running for the US Senate for the first time from Congress. And his team said, you know what, we have the mayor, we have our candidate for Congress, we have this rock star senator from Illinois speaking. They're all pretty great, but they're all men. I wonder if we could get a woman from the university to speak. Oh my God, bonus, a woman of color, that's amazing, let's get her up here. So I was asked to speak in front of 2 pretty great orators in our country, this rock star senator from Illinois that was becoming more well-known, and then Congressman Bernie Sanders. And I was asked to introduce the event, and I talked about student debt and climate change and how we need to elect leaders who really listen to young people. And I didn't fall off the stage or screw up my speech, so I was very proud of myself. And they go down the line of speakers, and this rock star senator from Illinois is closing out the event. And he says, I have a father from Kenya and a mother from Kansas. And I thought, I have a father from India and a mother from Illinois, and I've never heard a story like this in politics. And I have a funny name no one can pronounce, and thank you, Sarah, for doing such a great job. And started invoking the civil rights movement and talking about the arc of the moral universe bending toward justice. And I thought, what mainstream US senator speaks this way? And in the middle of all that, he turned to Bernie and he said, and you know what, Bernie? If you don't behave yourself, we're going to run Keisha for the Senate instead of you. So he knew my name, so that was really cool. And it was the first time anyone really encouraged me to run for office. And I had to peel away all those layers of thinking, this isn't how, I'm not meant to be in politics. I don't look like a politician. And 2 years later, we shared a ballot. And he became the 44th President of the United States. I became the youngest legislator in the country.
Wow.
tough acts to follow. It is a huge honor to be here, especially with these two. But thinking about my early introduction to politics, I've actually lived in 7 different states and the District of Columbia. I've moved around a lot in my life, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that my father is a political journalist. So I had a front row seat to many different elections and different conflicts in politics throughout my life, and that really got me interested. And I always remember looking at the political landscape and thinking, well, where are people who are like me? And then when I was 15 years old, I decided I'm going to run for United States Congress at some point in my life, which was a very weird thing for a 15-year-old girl to say. And I want to change that, and I think we're at a point where now being 15 and saying I'm going to be a senator or a congresswoman one day is not so bizarre. Even more bizarre, I was 16 years old and having dreams that I was filibustering on the Senate floor. So I'm a huge nerd. But I went to college, I went to Syracuse, and during my first week, I decided I was going to join the student government, and I went to an introductory meeting, and I honestly thought I was lost because I walked into an entire auditorium filled with men. And I'm looking around thinking, am I at a fraternity meeting? What's going on here? There's no women. And then confirmed it was the right place. And it was in that moment where I thought, well, there needs to be more representation, and there needs to be more women involved, and there aren't even women serving in executive capacities here. So I got involved, I started running, I went to a national conference, and there was a panel on women's leadership in student governments, and another woman was like, oh, you know, I really don't want to go listen to that feminist rant. And again, another point where I was like, it's such a shame that feminism is a dirty word, and there are women who think they're not going to benefit from this. So I'm starting to put the pieces together. Of how I can alleviate this problem, and as a sophomore, I became student body vice president. It was difficult, being in the public eye, even on a college campus, and thinking, wow, there's a lot of pressure. I almost talked myself out of running for student body president, and then determined that who better than me? I've already been in this kind of executive role, and if I think it's going to be difficult as a woman and I'm already in this great place to run, it's just going to be more difficult for somebody else down the line. So I decided to make the run. It was tough. I ended up winning, and through all of that, I developed a program called Leading Ladies to help alleviate the problem of women in student bodies across the country thinking they're underqualified, and not just in government, but in spaces that have been traditionally male-dominated. So in 2015, I had been given the great honor to represent the state of Rhode Island at Miss America, and with great power comes great responsibility. And I used that as an opportunity to start a national discussion about women in spaces where they have been historically underrepresented, whether it's been government, technology, business, the military. And that was so meaningful to me. And beyond that, I had this little list, kind of like my fantasy list, women who I would drop everything for in my life and go run their campaign if they were to get on a ballot. And a good friend of mine who had been Miss Vermont calls me up, and I'm getting through grad school at Brown, and she says, well, what are you doing after you graduate? I want you to come move to Vermont and run my campaign, and no questions asked. 10 minutes later, I had plans to pack up my bags and move to Vermont once I was done. And I did that. We were able to get out there as a 24-year-old and a 26-year-old candidate and campaign manager. And it was so cool to have young girls open their door while we're out canvassing, and to see 2 young women. And we looked at each other one time and we're like, this is so wild. There are going to be young women who grew up not thinking it's at all strange to see young women out there moving and shaking in their communities. And she didn't win, but again, as the mayor said earlier, sometimes it's not about winning, but elevating the conversation. So that's been my path in politics. I ended up enlisting in the military. So the plan to run has been put on hold for a little bit, but that's absolutely in the future. And I'm very excited to take my own experiences with what I've done in the service and be able to channel that into a future in politics.
All right, so we all obviously come to the space today with lots of different intersectionalities, and we all talked a little bit about, you know, being young, being a young woman, being a person of color, being an immigrant, being X, Y, Z. And at Ignite, a lot of our young women feel like the X, Y's, and Z's are sometimes deficits to running for office. And they're like, well, you know, my mom can't feed me, there's not enough food to put on the table, and so like I don't want it to come out that I'm low income, or that I'm, you know, all of these different policy issues that we are going to heavily discuss today and figure out solutions to, because women work together. And so I'd love for us to kind of turn our conversation into what are your intersectionalities, and where do you feel like you're leveraging them each day in the different roles that you're serving?
Do you want me to start?
Anybody can start.
Sure. So, so first of all, I grew up in my Indian immigrant father and Jewish American mother's Irish pub in Los Angeles. So from out of the gate, there was a lot of challenges and a lot of things to weave together. And I think that made life a little easier for me as I had to keep integrating. I moved to Vermont. I call myself a climate immigrant, and we're seeing that sadly more than ever now with the wildfires in California. But I wanted clean air. I wanted seasons. I found Vermont. And you know, from the moment I got there, people said, you know, you're really not afraid to speak up. We don't see a lot of people like you around here. And you know, that meant a lot of opportunities to grow and to really enjoy that leadership role that people gave me the space for. But I am really, really understanding and empathizing with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's experience right now in Congress. When I was running for the legislature, you know, my opponent said, well, she talked about growing up you know, on the free lunch program, but she has really nice genes, so I don't really understand, this isn't computing. And things that, you know, there's very little understanding of what it means to be a young woman running for office, what it means to be a woman of color being judged by your appearance, what it means to carry, you know, existing stigma and shame around the way you grew up and shopping at the Salvation Army to finally trying to be able to afford, you know, something nicer that you can wear and really present yourself as a legislator. I have to say, our first and only female governor, Governor Madeline Kunin, met with me when I was first running for the legislature. I have no idea what I was thinking, but I wore like a hooded sweatshirt and jeans and flip-flops to meet with her, which just looking back was just, I grew up with an immigrant parent. Like I try not to be disrespectful to someone so important. I don't know, really don't know what I was thinking, but she's that humble that she was like, I still support you, this is amazing. She's become like a grandmother to me. And 3 years later in the legislature, we were celebrating the 25th anniversary of her being elected, and I was wearing my tweed suit that I could finally afford, and she said, you do clean up very nice. So, you know, that ongoing struggle with how you look and how people are judging you. When I first got to the legislature, my goodness, like, you know, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez talking about being sent to a spouse event. You know, I kind of wish, I didn't know she was going to say she was put with the congressional pages or something, because when I got to the legislature, they wouldn't even give me my legislative ID card. You know, and when I went back to my committee room, my chair, who was a very thoughtful woman trying to make me feel welcome, said, do you think it's because you're young or a woman or a person of color? And I said, I don't think you can separate the three in this situation, and I don't know how I'm going to navigate this environment. But I really came to value and experience it as an asset. And I will say this, there were so many, you know, older Republican men who thought, you know, if I can relate to her and we can go have dinner together, maybe the world isn't so scary after all. And for me, it was the same feeling. If we can find common ground, then I can really make it here. I can sort of gain that respect. And I would say, you know, one thing that Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez is really being labeled as youngest congresswoman, youngest. When I got to the legislature, there was somebody in his 50s who had served since he was 19. He had been there 38 years. And he turned to me early in my term and he said, you know, Keisha, if you act like the youngest legislator and you set yourself apart as the youngest legislator, people are going to treat you like the youngest legislator. You don't want that. You want to figure out what gets everybody up in the morning, keeps them up at night, and find that common ground. And that was really enriching, not only for me professionally, but more so personally. The ability to really relate to my colleagues and know that it was a cultural plunge for them to get to know me, but also for me to get to know a dairy farmer who grazes, you know, his herd in both Canada and Vermont every day, and then, you know, kind of falls asleep sometimes in the legislature because he's been up so long in the morning. So, you know, those were the things that I felt like I don't have to sit here and say, I'm a young woman of color, none of you will understand me, but really find that common ground.
So one of the things I like to talk about, my experience running at Syracuse University, where you would think a lot of your peers, I mean, your peers are voting for you. These are people who support you, who see you on a regular basis. And when I decided to run, I started getting a lot of feedback. You know, you're very feminine. I think you should tone it down, or maybe don't wear pink, or lose the lipstick, things that were just inherently a part of my self-expression and my appearance. And I started playing that game where I'm like, okay, maybe I'll wear glasses instead of contacts. I won't curl my hair. I won't wear the lipstick. I'll wear jeans to class. I'll wear a football jersey. All of the things I was getting and all of this noise. And then I remember thinking distinctly, this is such a small level of erasing my identity. And I don't want any other woman who puts themselves in this position to ever erase any part of their identity because they think they need to fit a certain mold, or they're told to fit a certain mold because of who they are and what the legislature or what government has looked like for the extent of time. So I set all of that aside. I did me. I was unapologetically me. And that's something that has always stuck with me, because the game doesn't change unless game changers are out there putting themselves out there and owning who they are and owning their identities. So that's always something that has been first and foremost. As a young woman, don't let anyone change who you are, and don't let anyone mute your identity, no matter what that is. And then in terms of identities and who I am, something that's been so important to me is to see that visibility and see that representation. And I know we all feel that, and there's somebody who we can look to, who we really identify with. And one of the first people for me in legislature to see was Tulsi Gabbard, who is a huge inspiration for me, and also has been a huge game changer across the board. And this is a very exciting time, because as a female service member, we are now, of course, in a historic time for so many different identities entering Congress. But for the first time, we have more female veterans than ever before. And I know that there are issues that I will see, that I've dealt with, that will be handled by other women as well. So it's great to be able to elevate those issues, to identify with them. And if you're ever in a space where you look around and say, well, I can't identify with anything, then that is a key indicator that you need to be that trailblazer, and you need to be the one that provides that voice and that space of representation.
Yeah, what you're saying, reminds me of a saying that I've said many times. It's you can't be what you can't see. And for me, my different intersectionalities, my identities come into play every day. I was born in Pakistan and grew up in Cambridge, grew up in affordable housing. And now that I've been in office, I've seen that I get calls from people who speak Hindi, who speak Spanish, who speak Urdu, who have grown up, who are living in the developments that I lived at, who feel comfortable that they can call me and say, I am having a housing issue. I'm dealing with this issue. So to be able to have that opportunity to help them just by being there has a huge impact. The other identity I have is as an attorney. I think about last night. My last night was a little bit crazy, but kind of typical about how my different identities come into play. I was invited to a first-generation mixer that the mayor was hosting. I went to that for about 25 minutes, talked to some high school students from Cambridge Ridge and Lyon, where I also went. After that, I went to the Taj Boston for an annual gala for the South Asian Bar Association. I'm on the board. Spent maybe an hour there, went back to Cambridge to the Royal Sonesta for an annual gala for Justice Star Corporation, a community development corporation that works on housing issues, affordable housing. Spent 20, 30 minutes there. Went back to Taj Boston. So yeah, I am constantly balancing the different identities, but I'm fortunate to be able to have these identities because it allows me to help so many different people who probably never trusted government before, but they see me and say that, okay, she has our back. She can fix the lights on the street that have been out for 8 months. She can help file a housing application on my behalf. So it is one of those things where it's rare, has been rare to have different identities at the table. Even the fact when I was running, I looked at the council and I said, most of the people here own their homes. There's no renters, right? There's over 60% of individuals in Cambridge rent their apartment. So even things like that, there's different commonalities you can find with different sectors of the population. So that's been really fun for me to be able to always be using my identities to help people.
Awesome. I think there's a lot of pieces that we are all working on in terms of intersectionality, and I think that that's a really big piece to keep leveraging and figuring out. I really loved what you said earlier, Keisha, with figure out what gets people up in the morning, keeps them up at night, and keep figuring out what that common ground is. Because I think earlier Anne talked about and last night we were at a dinner, and how polarized we are as a country in this time. And I know I'm only 30, I think I'm 34 right now. Figuring out how do we continue to have that common ground. And at Ignite, we're nonpartisan, so we're having these conversations with young women who actually are trying not to even identify in a particular party when they're registering to vote. That was our biggest experience the past couple of months. And they're like whispering to me, in different parts of the country, do I have to do this like this? And so I think that's one of the biggest pieces is like, if you're there and there's a visual representation, there's a lot more willingness to do what they need to do in terms of what, to move action in that piece. So we're going to talk social media next, and our panel has a very different view on social media, but I remember when I was campaigning for our 44th president, and I was a grad student in Denver, Colorado, and I literally drove for different states, and I was a little brown girl at 22 years old, canvassing, and that was real different. And it was a very, I didn't even have a Twitter account. I think I kind of just had Facebook. And so I'm curious, how do you feel like social media has kind of changed the game in campaigning, but also changed the game in the way that you all communicate with constituents, and what platforms do you even use? Allie, do you want to start?
Sure. So I'm big on social media. I work in public affairs. I have a degree in public relations, so social media is huge for me. But there are a lot of different theories behind social media, and I don't think there's one right way to do it. But the biggest takeaways are be authentic, and 2, provide a variety of depth in your content, and 3, be accessible. And it's a great way to reach out to younger voters, especially because that's where so many people are, but also know your demographics. There's going to be an older crowd on Facebook, might be younger on Twitter, even younger on Instagram, Snapchat. There's a variety of different routes you can take. But it was key for me in whether it was me running student body campaigns, working on elections. I've done social media outreach and been a digital content curator on several campaigns now. And I say, have a blog where people can actually see you write in depth on the matters that you're passionate about, and be very thoughtful with what you put out there, of course. But it's a great way for people to say, okay, well, I really see this person's perspective and their life experience in a way that I wouldn't otherwise just by a tweet or a short Facebook post. But it's a great way to be accessible to different people. Not everyone, I think especially with millennials, not everyone totally understands the concept of going and meeting with someone directly. So it's one way that you can remove that barrier, and you can also be highly responsive to your constituents and to your electorate. So I'm a big proponent of social media, and I say do it, and just be very thoughtful with which forms and which platforms are right for you. If you're running for president, you might have everything from Facebook to Snapchat. If you're running for a local position, you can do without the Snapchat. You can probably do without the Instagram, but do what's right for you or in your constituency.
No, you go ahead. I hate social media. I cannot tell you how much I dislike it. In the beginning of the campaign, I was told, okay, social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And I said, I'll do the Facebook, but even that will be, it's not going to be every day. I concentrated on my door knocking. I did my door knocking. That's basically where I spent the bulk of my time. Building those one-on-one relationships. So something that I did early on was have and I still do it, I have a weekly newsletter that I send out on Sunday nights. And that weekly newsletter is a huge hit. It's for constituents to learn about what I do each day during the week. And so that's been a way that I've kept in touch with constituents. I have a weekly podcast called Women Are Here. Download it. Yeah. Plug for my podcast. It's free on iTunes. So that podcast, I do that with another city councilor. That's another way I keep up with constituents. Then I do spend maybe, I'd say, an hour or two on social media per week. I'm not a fan because I think, for me personally, I find it very problematic just to, I'm doing the work, and then people are like, take a picture of that and put it on, that, show what you're doing. It just feels not authentic to me. I do it sometimes, but it's like my night last night, I didn't put that on social media. So I really struggle with it. I do need to get better with it and use it more as a tool, but I found that it is good to be authentic. If I feel like I don't want to be a fake. And I think with what I've seen with social media, if you are posting every second of the day, your message gets diluted, right? It's a little bit too much. So I'm working on finding a balance, but I really haven't used it in my life, and I've been pretty successful without it. And also, a lot of my constituents, we're assuming people look at social media. It is for, the younger generation, sure, but if you are, you have to figure out how you cast a net with people like my mom. My mom's like, and really doesn't get what Facebook is, right? There's a lot of people like that. So there's other ways that you keep in touch, calling people and saying, hey, hi, how are you doing? It's been, 6 months to my term. Please let me know if I can do anything for you. So making those personal connections versus this social media, because I do think it's just not fun. So if people want to help me, for my next campaign for social media, I'm open, but I won't mean. Yeah, maybe you give me the talk.
She'll make your editorial calendar.
Exactly. Yeah.
So hopefully I represent kind of somewhere in the middle here. I was in college. I started college the same year Facebook started, so I'm like older millennial. We had to navigate this as it was a new tool. And I would just add a rule to Allie's rule, and maybe it's changed because there's a lot of grandparents who are posting weird stuff now, but I used to say, never post anything that you wouldn't want your grandmother to see or you wouldn't want to see it on the front page of the newspaper the next day. I still believe that. I don't know what your grandparents are like, but still, it's really important that even now, if you're thinking about a future in politics, and maybe it will change, we're in the era of Trump, and maybe, people don't care what honor you bring to an office, potentially. Sorry, we're nonpartisan. But you still, I think, have to conduct yourself differently. You're held to a very different standard as a young woman. So I would be very thoughtful about what you post, and make sure it threads together in the direction of the kind of issues you care about, the kind of person you want people to see you as. And also remember, I think, to what Sambal is saying, have a healthy relationship with social media. I don't care what age people are. When I see them live tweeting a meeting and they're actual elected official, I think, how are you paying attention and doing your job, when you're on Twitter so much? So, those likes, those tweets, those retweets, whatever they are like little pellets of food for a hamster. You have to put it down and actually engage with people. And there's obviously more brain science coming out about this, but you're not going to have a healthy governance style or relationship to social media if you can't do that face-to-face and engage with people. So just be really thoughtful about how you make it in service to you rather than be in service to your social media.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies. So we are 10 days since we had an election last week, and we still have a lot of ballots to count in some states. And we've seen this huge wave of women who are getting elected in the highest numbers in Congress in my lifetime. And we have Congresswoman Ocasio, who last year has shared, obviously, that she was waiting tables and now is in freshman orientation. And so I'd love us to talk a little bit about what are we learning about young women's roles in our current democracy?
I'd say we're learning that you're needed now. You're needed yesterday. Our involvement isn't contingent upon us having all of the degrees or all of the experience or working our way up some government ladder that is a myth that you absolutely don't need to do. If you have that experience, many of us have student loans, or we are looking for affordable housing, or there are other issues that are directly impacting us as women, as millennials. There are a variety of different instances where I've looked at the current legislative climate and said, well, nobody here represents my belief, and when you do that, that's your time to get involved, whether you're involved in your community as an activist or you decide to get on the ballot yourself. And it just goes to show you that there are people who, it's not just people who can run, who can rally the support, but there are people who look at young women and say, yes, she has something. She maybe doesn't represent me across the board, but she has value, and she has a perspective that is going to be valued to the entire country. And it's such an exciting time. I always say, when I started Leading Ladies and my whole initiative to help train young women to see themselves in politics and to run, I always said, well, my goal is one day that I don't have to do this. And looking at this election, I feel like we're so much further along and so much more at that level. This has been like the dream, to see this wave of powerful and dynamic and diverse women to come to the table. So if you're sitting here today and you're thinking, yeah, there's something that I'm really passionate about and there isn't somebody representing me, and maybe I'm not done with college, or maybe I haven't gone to grad school, or I haven't even run before or worked on a campaign, guess what? The time is now. You are needed. You can be there, you can do this, and if you need any help, I know I speak for myself and everyone else up here, I hope that people like us can help you get there, and talk to us. This is a network, and I think everyone in this room, too, is capable of helping elevate the next generation of leaders.
So I think, while I really, really celebrate the women that have made up this blue wave that's gotten to Congress, and many of them were state legislators very recently, like Ilhan Omar in Minnesota. I don't want to forget that we have some bad news at the state levels. Again, this is nonpartisan, but I think it's fair to say that what happened in Georgia is an abomination, and it disenfranchised a lot of people. And we probably should have our first black female governor in the country. And we shouldn't underestimate the power of seeing women in office as your local judges, like we saw 19 black women elected in Houston. We shouldn't underestimate seeing women as mayors, because that breaks that final glass ceiling of not seeing women in executive roles, and particularly in state legislatures. I've been doing this for 8 years, and I still can't say it. And governors, because so many decisions are made at the state level, and so much of our future ability to be enfranchised and be involved in the political discourse happens at the state level. So we should really celebrate what's happening in Congress, and I hope that they help make sure that voices are heard around the country as well, because we've seen some scary stuff in this election as well. What I will say about this exciting wave in Congress and beyond is that there should be some updated information. It's very nerdy, but the last time we looked at how many young people are in office comprehensively was a while back. I would like to see something updated, but in the mid-2000s, the study showed that young people under 35 in office, it was about 5% of all elected officials in the country. And when you look at that 5%, a quarter of the 5%, so about 1.5% of all elected officials, were women under the age of 35. Okay, so hold that statistic. And then when you think about who makes it to Congress, that is a group of people where over half of them started in politics before the age of 35. So that is a bottleneck for white, Christian men, and guess who they like to make the most laws about? Women under 35 and their bodies. So there is a science here about what it takes to start young, like you all are hopefully thinking about doing and will do, and make it all the way to those highest levels of power. I think we look at these women who've emerged on the national scene and think, wow, they really came out of nowhere, but they didn't. Ayanna Pressley was your city councilor for a long time and brought a lot of other women of color with her to the city council. You know, Ilhan Omar was in the state legislature. Stacey Abrams was the minority leader in the Georgia legislature. So you are looking at a lot of women who have paid their dues and have deep experience. And so I don't want you to walk away thinking, I just need to have a better Twitter account, right? You need to, you know, respect the hustle, like Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez has said, and put the time in on the pavement and get to know your local community to lead. So, you know, really think about this wave as the product of so much of hard work from women and people of color, and that there were probably more seats to be won, and we were cheated out of those. And frankly, we have to pay attention to that for future elections.
Well said. And I'll add that I think this wave is very important and so exciting. I think if you're thinking about running for office and it seems daunting, then think about other things that you can do in the local community. There's boards and commissions. You can start somewhere and go step by step, because there's a big experience in that. I think people have been asking me, what do I need to do? And I say, first, you know, is there an issue that you're passionate about? Have you reached out to this board that exists? I think there are issues with boards and commissions, and we're seeing it in Cambridge. A lot of people who have the time, right, who are retired are on these boards and commissions. So we do also have to think about how we're promoting people to get involved and get experiences in elected life, in local government, because there are already these pre-existing barriers that exist. If I am a mom with kids, I may be interested in municipal broadband, but I have to go home every day and feed the kids. If I'm not getting some sort of stipend to be on a board, it's going to make it harder for me to participate. So I would encourage the young women in the room to think about how to get more involved in that way, because there is running for office, and that's a path, but it is a long path, as you say. There is a lot of hustle in between, and there's a lot of different experiences you can get. So I'm just very, very excited that we have this movement, and it's giving more young women ideas of what they can be. So it's very exciting.
Well, you teed up our afternoon. So if you're in our Young Women's track this afternoon, you're going to walk away with your plan today. And we'll start with, what do you want to change in your community? I wanted to see if we had any questions from our audience. Amy's going to run, but you can, do you mind standing and...
Hi, my name is Amy Assessor. I do public policy at State Street. Thank you so much. So you talked a lot about the positives. I just want to know who has confronted you as you've been running and said, you kind of touched on this, but how have you handled those situations where people have said you shouldn't run, or you don't represent me, or you don't have enough experience, and how have you handled those conversations?
All right, who wants to start that one? Oh, who are the haters?
Who are the haters?
Is that the framework? How do we, we won't name anyone today, but how do we work with folks that are not who don't necessarily want to vote with us?
So I'll start off. When I was working in Congresswoman Ileana Ross-Layton's office, I was actually on the Hill, getting to know different mentors, being paired up with people, and I remember meeting with a gentleman who said, okay, so you've been a fellow in this office on the Hill, where do you see yourself moving on the Hill next? And I said, well, I'm planning on moving back home, but where I see myself here next is as a member of Congress. And he just looked at me and was like, okay. You need to do a little bit more before that happens. You need to slow down. And I explained to him, I really feel that by the time I'm back here, it's because I ran, and that could be in a couple of years. And I hope that this gentleman is looking at the election now and saying, okay, well, she was right. Young women can do this and be successful. But on the other head of the same coin, there was a young woman who was working in office in a legislative position on the Hill too, who had met with my cohort of fellows, a bunch of young women who were excited to run for office one day, and she told us, you need to pay your dues. And I'm working my way up, and we all left with such a bad taste in our mouth because so many of us had the intention to run, and now we're like, okay, well, here's another young woman telling us we need to pay our dues and we need to work behind the scenes. And again, this is an opportunity where if you are a woman in a place of power and you can be a mentor and you can support others, pull them up with you. Don't tell them you need to work your way to get here, because if you are ready to go and you have the passion and you have what you need to do to put that out there, then absolutely take it and run with it, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. So I think a lot of this is just changing minds and perceptions, and I'm very hopeful that this past election has really started to do just that.
Do either of you, does anyone else want to add anything before we take another question?
I have so many haters. And what I've learned is you can't please everyone. You can't please everyone. And I think that's the biggest takeaway. I think people will often want to disagree with you, and that's good. People will say some things about your experience and what you've said. The nature of the roles we have, at first when I started, it was upsetting when someone would say, are you even from Cambridge? Where's his name from? Do you grew up here? A lot of those questions of, you're not even from here, or, oh, you grew up in affordable housing and you went to Brown? I had a lot of that in the beginning, and you deal with it and you move on, because if you have it stick with you, it will prevent you from being successful. So early on, I realized can't please everyone. You engage. Sometimes you don't engage. If someone is being very rude and saying awful things, you say, I'm sorry, I can't speak to you right now. And you get comfortable with that, because if you really try and engage, and you will end up getting hurt. So you have to figure out ways to protect yourself as well. But you got to love the haters and deal with it.
Yeah,
and
that's when you know you made it.
That's exactly.
I had my first troll at 18.
Really quick, make it your fuel, eat it for breakfast, prove them wrong. When I first ran, my opponent said, I'd be curious to know what she thinks she brings to the table. I knocked on every door twice, I doubled his vote count, and I won by the largest margin of any challenger in the state.
Amy's got it. We're good. Please stand.
Hi, Symbol. I just want to say thank you for every single thing that you do for Muslim women around Massachusetts. As a Muslim woman, my question is, what are some of the challenges of, being in the identity that you're in, and what advice would you give other Muslim women who might think about running for public office?
Well, thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate it. My advice would be to be you. For me, I'm Muslim. I'm proud of being Muslim. I never, I really, I thought about how it would come up in Cambridge. And on one of my palm cards, I did put, I'm a young Muslim woman from, I kind of gave my little background, and I did get a call from someone who basically, it was right post the Charlottesville white supremacy rally. And she calls and says, why did you put this on the palm card? Why does that matter? I'm offended that you're putting the fact that you're Muslim on here. And she went on about how she felt about Islam. And I said, well, thank you for letting me know how you feel. And in my head, I was like, oh, typical white supremacist. But I didn't say that. But she hung up on me actually. But I didn't hang up on her. But I knew early on that I was going to probably get some of those calls. So if you prepare yourself, and that's what I would say, prepare yourself for the comments that you may likely get, because let's face it, we do live in a very, yes, we're a diverse society, but we are a segregated society. We have big issues with racism. structural racism. They are, ingrained in our society. So you have to prepare in that way. It's daunting to prepare because, I think as a woman of color, it is different to run as a woman of color. So you are dealing with different perceptions about you, but it's okay. You use that as fuel. You use it as fuel. I told my parents about that encounter. I told my family and friends about that encounter, and my dad was like, "Oh my God, like even in Cambridge, how can that happen?" And I said, "Yeah, even in Cambridge, And so, that's a long-winded answer of saying you'll never know what you'll get, but be authentic. It's a part of who you are, so be proud of it. I think for me, what has been the best result is when I'm going to a mosque or if I'm going to a development that I know is very Muslim, the moms and dads, when they see me, they look to their daughter and they're like, "Oh, that could be you one day." Right? And they absolutely, it can be them one day because it is possible. It's definitely possible, and we're seeing it more and more. So I encourage you to run. I encourage anyone who has any doubts to put themselves out there because it is a really important thing that you can do.
Can we take one more question? We'll take one more question. Ray, choose from your middle center here. Oh.
Can you guys touch on the alternative? So I ran for state representative, lost my election by 90 votes, but then I went on to organize 45,000 people to march against racism. So,
yeah.
So one of the things no one ever talks about is when you don't win and what to do next. Can you guys speak on, there are other ways to get plugged in, to be a part of your community, even though you may have lost your election?
That's a great question.
Yeah. First of all, thank you.
Yes.
Huge round of applause. Thank you for doing what you have done. So I commend you for that. And there are so many different avenues of approach for getting involved in politics, whether you are testifying at your state house or maybe writing an op-ed or even just being an advocate and putting yourself out there. Again, using social media. You can blog about things, you can connect people. And one of the great things about being involved as a candidate or as a staff member is you learn how to organize, you learn how to rally people around a cause, whether or not you won. When I was running a campaign, we were in a Trump district, and she was a young Democratic female, and she had the most votes of any Democrat on that ballot. And we're like, all right, we lost tonight, but this goes to show you there are people out there who are listening, there are people who care about what you had to say, and you have to propel that forward. So I think one of the best things you can do, one of the best modes of education is being involved in a campaign as a candidate or as a staff member, and then channeling that into advocating and getting people to keep the momentum up. So thank you for what you've done, and I hope that that's some helpful different avenues for you.
So I think Eisenhower said this, but I first heard it when Ambassador Samantha Power said it, but the only title greater than president is citizen. And when people come to the legislature and bring 40,000 people, they have a much bigger voice than anyone in that building, and there is formal authority, and then there is leadership, right? And just because someone has formal authority doesn't mean that they are exercising leadership. So what you did was leadership. And second, I do hope you run again. Not that that is the highest and greatest thing you can do is run for office. I do think that's probably why we're here. But everybody loses. I spent 8 years in the legislature, my entire 20s, and I ran for lieutenant governor when I was 29 in 2016. It was a weird year all over the place, but I got the highest, I got double digits. I was the first woman of color to ever get double digits in a statewide election in Vermont. And I felt very proud of that, and it allowed me to take a break and go to the Kennedy School. And again, I'm watching the video at the Kennedy Library. And, President Kennedy, when he was in 1956, when he was a senator, ran to be vice president and lost. And he says, in his reflections, you learn more from losing than winning. Really, all the mysteries of politics are revealed to you. I'm still figuring out all the mysteries, but at the same time, you know, you really, you will lose more than you win. Everybody has in politics, everybody you've seen who's president, who's you know, in Congress as a governor, because you're putting yourself out there. And the only way you truly lose is if you never put yourself out there at all. So thank you for everything you've done.
Well, we are coming to a close to our Young and Running plenary this morning, and I just want to close with two pieces that I've circled here. One is I feel like all of us have run because we really truly want to honor and serve our communities, and in whatever leadership roles that we have within our communities, that's the big piece, is the call to service, is that I'm not doing, my work is never about Sarah, it's about my community. And at Ignite, we're changing the face of democracy every single day. And that is a really big piece for us to keep working towards. And then I think this panel and our work is writing this new narrative. We're going to be teaching our kids about what's happening in 2018 in a whole other way than what happened in 1984. And so I believe that we are all leveraging our positions of privilege and power in the most positive ways, and I encourage all of you to continue this conversation, and I think we are going to a break shortly, but I will turn it back to Anne. Thank you all so much. But I want a picture on the stage. Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our moderator and our panelists. I'm looking for a word that goes beyond inspiration, and I can't quite get it, but I'm deeply inspired by what each of you has done, and I know what you will do. And I'm also thinking about where we were in November 2016 when we had our last biennial, and there were so many long faces and eyes brimming with tears. And if we could have even imagined this panel and the work that Ignite is doing all over the country. I found out last night from Sarah and Amy that they're in half the states, and by 2020, they're going to be in the 50 states. And we're going to be seeing young women leaders from every state in the country. So I want to thank everyone who spoke this morning. I want to say that we have a 15-minute break. Then we have our amazing keynote speaker. I won't even say her name yet. So please, we have coffee, tea, and muffins in the back. Take a break. You know where you can find bathrooms. And try to be back in your seats right at 10:45, because we're going to go right at 10:45. Again, thank you to the panel.